Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
And a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human.
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture.
And what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion.
Hey, Erin.
Hey, Kelley.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Keeping warm.
Yeah, good. It's
Trying to.
Yeah, it's chilly.
It is.
We were just talking about my kids. They're gonna flush some ice cubes down the toilet later because they're hoping for a snow day.
Oh, is that like an old wives' tale?
I don't know
Or
if it's
a
old.
New wives'
New
tale?
wives' tale. I think.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I like it. It's very witchy.
Yeah. I know. We got the toddler into it, and she's like, "Wait, we're doing what?"
She's like, ice kid.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. That's good. Okay.
So we are starting a new theme.
Yes.
And the theme is about how change happens.
Yes. How change happens and what distracts us from making change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a lot. I have a lot of thoughts about this because I think that our ability to make change varies based on kind of like the level at which we're operating, right? So, you think about like the kind of that macro level. So at a government level where we have such a small ability to sort of, create change on that level, on the level of the community that we're in, which is where I think we have a little bit more agency. And then obviously on the individual level where we have some agency, and both of those, I think our agency is somewhat limited. Like there are certain things that, in the concept of free will that we have more control over than others. But certainly in those arenas, we have the ability to put things in place that can create change.
Yeah. Yes. And the closer we are to ourselves, the more agency we have. Yeah. And yet it feels like right now in our polarized world that people are much more focused on the macro where they have the least amount of agency.
Yeah. I mean, so to your point about what distracts us, right?
Yeah.
And that is a huge part of what distracts us. I mean, I've said this a lot, right? Is this environment of too much information that we live in, and so much of that too much information is information that we don't have any ability to have any control or influence over. Which I'm a big fan of Stoicism, and the fundamental tenet of that philosophy is knowing the difference between what you can change and what you cannot, which is the serenity prayer. But the thing about that, which is also really important to know, which is kind of that next step, is that when you spend a lot of time focusing on things that you cannot change, that means that's you're not investing in the things that you actually can.
Yeah.
And these big scale distractions are great examples of that, and we all fall into those traps.
We all do. On both sides of the political spectrum, right? For sure. Yeah. And I love that. And I feel like that's, we've hit on that before also as kind of a spiritual tenet of, like we only have so much space in our lives. And sometimes you have to kind of give something up to move into another space that's more, where you can do more good.
More generative.
That's more generative. And if we are just keep ourselves in this space where we're just kind of spinning, which is, I feel like such the energy.
The doom scroll.
Doom scroll. What is it called when we're kind of in our own little bubbles in those social media worlds? Social media bubble.
Yeah.
Echo chamber, right. Yeah,
Ah,
but that's the same, right?
yeah,
Doom
yeah,
scrolling,
yeah,
echo, these
yeah.
things that are just kind of that keep coming back, but that
Hmm.
don't actually move us forward.
Yeah, they keep us stuck.
They keep us stuck.
Because it just is reinforcing ideas that we already know,
Yep.
and therefore limits our ability to think about like other possibilities.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I find so frustrating about the design of our information ecosystem is that so I was telling you, I want to take a step back. So this idea of too much information when we think about like what are solutions, right? So
Mhm.
this idea is not new, right?
Mhm.
We've gone through different periods. Humanity has gone through different periods where all of a sudden there was an explosion
Right.
in information. You
The
know,
printing press.
yes. So after the printing press, people went crazy.
Yeah.
And to a certain degree, right? All of a sudden you had this like explosion of ideas.
Mhm.
There was tons of fighting. There was a lot of like burning people at the stake sort of
Oh my
behavior.
gosh, yeah.
And one of the things that grew out of that was, hey, I think we need to establish a universal schooling structure
Mm.
so that we can give people tools to process this volume of information.
Yep.
And we're in that we're kind of in that same moment. I think we're in this like
Yeah.
we're in that, dawn of the internet, and now with artificial intelligence, like the amount of information that is available and is
Mhm.
produced, and knowing what's real and what's not, it's like it's too much for people to
Yep.
deal with.
Yep.
And we are in this space that we require as a society better tools for kind of negotiating this volume of information.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, too, I feel like even the kinds of information we're getting, like we are not created to hold all of this, like
No.
this weighty, like painful information that's on this, global, all this global information. I just don't think we can, like, how do you go through your day understanding what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Israel and Gaza, and just not feel like an asshole just going out for coffee with your friend and talking about lipstick. Like you just like, right? I mean, not that I go out for coffee and talk about lipstick, but I mean, so I was in a PD the other day, and there was a session taught by a woman who is an Israeli professor at an American university, and the subject was what it's like to be an Israeli professor at an American university right now. And I won't go into the things that she said, but it was disturbing, the things that she has had to experience
Yeah.
in light of like what's going on in her country right now. But the thing that I took away from it actually was that Americans, we feel like if we're not saying something that we're not doing anything, and yet for her, what was so painful was the fact that people were saying things without having any,
Yeah.
like you don't have a dog in this fight.
Yeah.
This is not your.
Or they have like this much information.
Yeah, and you only have this much information.
Yep.
You're not connected in any kind of real emotional. I mean, like, of course, some people are, right?
Yeah.
If you were Jewish in America and you have ties to Israel, of course,
Yeah.
like yes,
Yeah.
but a lot of people don't, or if you have no ties to Palestine and you're so, there's so many times where I feel like on social media where people are like, if you are silent, then you are complicit. And this was such a real example of no, there is actually compassion,
Yeah.
a compassionate silence that we can just be silent and
Yeah.
listen and learn and hear from people and just be near people in their suffering and in their pain and just
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah.
And that is the compassionate stance because I don't have all the information, right?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So this idea that people feel like action is just simply making a post or having a stance, having a political stance makes you active. And I just don't think that's true.
Yeah, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's very difficult for anybody to have all of the context, you know, and it should just be we would be better served to listen and learn rather than constantly feeling like we need to take a position on something, and to be open. Actually, this is kind of cute. Like, so my oldest son, he is in his first year at middle school, and he got an award from his teachers, which was very cute.
Yeah.
And on the little printout, it was like that, you know, something to the effect of like that he's always sharing his ideas, but then like the second or third line was like he's also always willing to listen to other people's ideas and revise his opinion based on a strong counter argument.
That's awesome.
Based on fact. And you're like, well, what a wonderful concept.
Yes, right? Right? That I could actually be agile in my thinking.
Yeah. And not be like so grounded in a position that getting new information or information that contradicts like your, you know, perceived like the path you want to be on is like, you know, allows you to say, oh, well, maybe I can like take a different direction, or soften my perspective because clearly I didn't know everything, or the information I thought I had wasn't correct.
Yeah. Or just to say, I don't know. And
yeah.
And in light of this information, I obviously I love the word soften, right? I'm softening my opinion here. And I'm not sure if I have an opinion.
Yeah, and then maybe it's, hey, you know what? Actually, now I'm actually open to persuasion. Like I'm open to the possibility that maybe I was wrong. You know?
Yeah. I think that's so powerful. And the other thing is,
but that requires like using the word softening again, but of the ego, because it means like to be able to be open and receptive to information that challenges your perspective means that like you have to be okay with not knowing everything, being right, and you know, so it's a challenge. It's a challenge to be able to kind of like take that stance.
It's so interesting, right? Because you would think that being really firm in your beliefs and your stances would kind of protect you against, say, conspiracy theories, or protect you against, alternate like views that are perhaps wrong, but are being like, you know, kind of put on you from, you know, other.
Yeah, but the opposite is true.
The opposite is true.
And I think I've mentioned this before, but like, yeah, I know I have. We've talked about this before, but there was this series, and I'll mention it again, but it was a Netflix series, and oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember it's like a spoof of like a historical like thing, right? So she's like a faux historian, and she's interviewing all these real professors, and she throws out these crazy theories and anecdotes. And these real professors, most of them are like, well, I'm not aware of that information. Like it's clearly wrong. But they will not, because they're like, I'm actually not trained to speak on that. Right? Yeah. Like they will not talk about like, and I loved that because I'm like, when somebody really, really is an expert, they're reluctant to like sit to talk about things that they're like, this is actually out of my depth, and they'll just say it. Yeah, like this is not something that is information that I'm not aware of. Yeah. But I love that. It's like, and that's when you can tell the difference between somebody who's just like, I'm here to just talk about whatever, and like a true expert on a topic.
Yeah. That there is. Yeah, that there's a willingness and an egolessness in just saying, I don't know. Yeah. Even if you know the person is saying.
Yeah. They're like, you always want that possibility for like, well, I don't know. Maybe this is information I'm not aware of. I haven't studied it. So I can't give you, I need to go back and do some research before I can respond.
I can respond to that. Yeah. Right. But if you are so certain. Yeah. And that, and I think I've said this before, this is that I think I said this on our first podcast. This is Anne Lamott, the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's certainty.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you are so certain,
Yeah.
then you just leave no room for, there's no, you can't have any faith because I'm right in my
Right. Yeah.
beliefs. And I think people who are smarter, richer, and more, and maybe, I won't say meaner, but in some ways crueler
Yeah.
than the average Joe is out there understanding how people respond to these kinds of arguments, and are throwing things out there for people to just catch hold of and to get upset about.
Yeah, because we're so driven by emotion. As much as we want to believe that we can behave logically in the way that these professors are, right? Because they're trained in using the newest part of their brain, that neocortex, that's like gives them such strong rational thinking skills. But that is so easily overridden by the older parts of our brain that are driven by emotion and are the things that create action.
Yep.
Which then kind of goes to, what I was talking about at the top, which is like, okay, how and on what levels can we create change? And, I think when you really start to dig into the concept of free will, do we have it? How much do we have? When you really start to like pick it apart, you start to realize, man, I am not as in control of my decisions and actions as I would like, right? Like there's research that shows that before, like they hook people up and to be like, okay, you're going to press a button. And what they'll find is that like you feel like you're consciously pressing the button, right? But the decision has already been made in your brain before you're aware that you're physically doing something, right? So much of our just like immediate responses are things that are just automatic.
Yep.
And so our ability to create change for ourselves, because human beings are pattern-seeking animals, right? And so we spend all this time kind of scanning the environment, looking for patterns to try to anticipate what's going to happen next or what we should do next. And once we establish those patterns of behavior, we just kind of get stuck in them. Yep. So this book I just started, I'm not done with it yet, but it's been out for a little while. It's pretty popular. It's called Atomic Habits.
Oh yeah.
And he gives this great anecdote about how strong our associations are in sort of the habits that we have. And he tells a story about this woman who many, many years ago was really into horseback riding. And her friends would go horseback riding, and they would smoke cigarettes while they were horseback riding. And
that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I would do that.
And so eventually, I don't know what happened to the horseback riding, but like she decides she, wants to stop smoking. So she stops smoking, hasn't been horseback riding in a really long time, like decades and decades and decades. And then decides late in life, like, later in life, I want to get back into that horseback riding.
And get back on a horse.
The very first time she's like on the horse, she's like, God, I want a cigarette.
Yeah.
And hasn't smoked in a really long time, but that association that is there. And he's like, those associations are so strong and they're so hard to break.
Yeah.
And there's ways you can do it. There's ways that you can sort of structure your environment. So for example, and this is like we are talking about too much information in social media, our visual, of all of our senses, the visual processing it occupies the most space. So for us, if we want to eat better, for example, not having a bowl of cookies on the counter. If there's cookies on the counter, we'll eat them whether or not we want them or not. We're like, oh, that seems like a good idea right now, right?
Look great.
But if there's apples, we're more likely to eat apples just because they're there.
Yeah.
And that of the, I guess it's 11 million sensory inputs in the body, 10 million are devoted to just visual processing and
makes
insight.
Total sense.
So one of the easiest ways is just to literally change the structure of your visual environment. to cue. And so another example he gave was it was a hospital, and they were trying to get people to drink less soda.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the checkout, they put a refrigerator that had water in it. And they didn't tell anybody to do anything different.
Right.
They're just like, still go to the cafeteria, buy whatever you want to buy. No one was instructed to do anything. And like soda sales drop are 20%.
Wow.
Because
it wasn't
it's right.
yeah.
It's
their
like
visual
they bought
island.
water instead because it was right there.
Wow.
It's crazy. But it also reminds us of how little like we actually are making
Yeah.
these decisions for
Yeah.
ourselves in a way. Like we're just kind of grooving through our environment
Yeah.
and picking up on cues and then having this response without really
Well, that's
thinking
funny
it.
because I remember I told you, like in this apartment we live in now versus the house we lived in before.
Mhm.
The house, like the kitchen was attached, like the kitchen was kind of open.
Yeah.
And now, like the kitchen is kind of off to the side, like you have to actually go into the kitchen. And I'm like, yeah, I actually snack less and eat less because I
Have to
be-
go. It's
because
further
not-
away.
I don't see it. I don't sit in the living room and see the
Yeah.
kitchen.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. It's
That's-
so true.
yeah. That's really
So
interesting.
the his point, and I think this is right, is like if we want to sort of pre-program our minds to make a better decision, like the future version of yourself, you
Yeah.
want to make a better decision.
Yeah.
You have to kind of start structuring your environment in a way that you cultivate habits
Mhm.
so that you're training your brain to like have a different association.
Yep.
And then I start to think about like, okay, then how do you apply? Like, I mean, the hospital example is a good one, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, then how do you apply these sorts of methods in a manner that is a little bit bigger, right?
Yeah.
That's influencing
Community.
more people.
Yeah.
For you, like in a classroom or in the theater, like how
Right.
you structure things
Right.
matters so much.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. I love that idea that by creating that environment. And we have ultimate control how we create our own like home
Yep.
environment.
Yep.
We have some influence on our, the spaces that we inhabit
Yeah.
for work and
Yeah.
community. And then we have very little.
Yeah.
Basically we have a vote.
Yeah, so that kind of change requires, like on that level, it requires collective action, which is
Yes.
where you get
Yeah.
unions and
Yep.
those sorts of movements that are bigger to
Right.
drive policy.
Yeah.
Because and on that level, and you think about there's a book, and gosh, it's been a long time since I read it. It was called Nudge by Cass Sunstein.
Mhm.
And he was an advisor to, I know Obama, maybe other presidents. He's a professor, but anyway, the concept of nudge, right, is like how do we create government policy that moves people just gently in the
Mhm.
direction we want them to go.
Right.
So whether that's like public health or hey, we want people to save for their retirement and pensions are going away. And so we better develop some tools that encourage people to save money. So let's develop the 401k, or he wasn't advising on that, but like these are kind of examples
Right.
of these things that the government could put in place that encourage people to do the things you want them to do that are
Right.
good for society as a
Right.
whole.
Or even like corporations, right?
Yeah.
Like Biden's policy on climate change and
Yeah.
and
Yeah, making it easier for people to like charge your electric car. Well, I
Mhm.
might be more likely to buy one if I
Right.
know it's easy for me to charge.
Right.
And like if it's not, then I'm not gonna do that.
Right. So I read an article today in the New York Times on I encourage everybody to go back and read it when you hear this, but it's entitled "America is Under Attack: Inside the Anti-DEI Campaign," and it's it speaks about this organization. I think it's called the Claremont Group, something like that. But it's this group of lobbyists and policymakers that are trying to basically they're attacking DEI, but it's not really DEI.
They're just trying to use things that they think will scare people in
Yeah.
order to motivate outcome, right?
Outcome, yes. And so there's a whole conversation in the article because the Times got a hold of like 5,000 emails or something in this organization, and they have a whole conversation about language and like what you're talking about in terms of association, and like how do we take this word and and make it negative for the common public.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I see. So you have this movement of DEI, that comes out, and
mhm.
then the goal, like if their goal is to have negative associations with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, because most people, they did a poll. Most people look at diversity as a good thing. Look at equity as a good thing, right? Look at inclusion as a good thing.
Right.
So,
Right.
how do they, so wokeism is like, it's just this really patronizing way of kind of, demonizing this
Yeah. The
movement.
idea of woke, which is like to be awake, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but what they landed on, the word, because they were like, it's really hard for us to make equity a bad word.
Mm-hmm.
But the word that they feel like, or the phrase that they felt like they could really vilify was social justice.
Oh,
Which I was like,
interesting.
seriously?
Hmm.
That's what you landed on. Like you can make social, so like the whole thing, like social justice warrior,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
again, just like so patronizing.
And well, I think in maybe trying to take things that are well intentioned, right, and maybe they don't always work out the way that you hope they do, right, and in terms of like censorship of speech, and there's a lot
Mhm.
of research around that, but to then take those things that are well intentioned, maybe always aren't executed the way that you hope that they would be, but then connecting them to the most horrible examples of those things kind of gone awry, right?
Right.
Because there are a lot,
Sure.
and but yeah, I think it's a unfortunate political strategy that
Well, and like what we're talking about, right? Like if you're trying to pull your influence into a place that actually has legs,
mhm,
right? What you're going to do is you're going to try to create social justice opportunities in your community. You're going to try to create equity in your community.
right.
And so to kind of take that language and um, tinge it with this kind of
Yeah,
wokeism.
I think it's like it's gotten so confused. I think in so many ways.
Mm.
Like it's like almost like that the term or like the idea of like DEI or whatever is trying, like people are just applying it to so many different things.
Yeah.
And so like when I hear you talking, it's like you're talking about how do we make community when there are people who really need help in a
Yeah.
community, how do we provide that
Yeah.
so that they can make good use of their lives and live with
Yeah. How do we leverage what we have for our community so
right,
that we
right,
can all
right,
yeah.
which is different than like I think sometimes the more negative aspects of where that has gone, which is like you've now said something that makes me uncomfortable, therefore you should be like voted off the island sort of
Right.
stuff.
And see, that to me
Yeah.
that's not action. That's again getting back to this idea of
Yeah.
like beliefs and
Yeah.
like policing people's beliefs and language,
Yeah.
right? And that's not it. But if you're saying like it makes me uncomfortable that you want to work at a soup kitchen, who's ever said that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's ever said your volunteerism
Yep.
is really offensive to me?
Right.
Right? Whereas like, yeah, you're, these kind of inflammatory things that you say on social media, blah, 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 that might be offensive to me. Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
that's also, those are words,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas like when I think about social justice, I think about marching, I think about showing up and helping, I think about creating space for people that don't have opportunities.
Yeah.
And that's justice. That's, restorative practices,
Yeah.
policing beliefs and language. And that's where I feel like, when I've read articles about that are critical of DEI, that I am kind of more on, aligned with, it's about the things like, professors being forced to
Right.
write.
It's in the academia
Being forced to say
realm.
like, I, follow this.
Right.
And even if they do, just the idea of being forced to say something on paper in order to assure your position feels
Yeah,
more like
or that like you can't
McCarthyism.
publish certain research, or you might lose your job because you showed a painting that some people found offensive even though you gave them fair warning, and
Yes.
all those
things.
examples.
Yes.
Yeah, well that's I like that distinguishing of those things. It just goes back then to the power of the power of language is so powerful.
Yeah.
And
And somebody is deciding how you associate a word.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those people that are kind of deciding that, like, we're really good in America at advertising, and the people that are not selling you cookies are advertising ways that they want you to think.
Yeah, they sure are. Well, I guess in the affirmative version, right?
Yeah.
And then the positive version of that. So kind of where do we want to take this series next is we are thinking, our next guest is going to be an organization based here in St. Louis. When we think about how do we create meaningful change or give back to our community that's here in St. Louis, where we can affect positive change, we're going to talk to the folks over at Bridge of Hope.
Yeah, we're going to talk to our friend Deb Weens, who's the president of the board there, and the executive director there, Kelley Braggs. And they are going to tell us about their organization and kind of how that organization has changed, and how, people, regular, just, community people are kind of helping in ways that, they need help too.
Yeah.
So for our local audience,
That if you want to get involved in something that, very tangibly can make a difference in people's lives in a really meaningful, direct way, that this maybe is an organization that you might want to contribute to or get involved with.
Yeah. And you can be, this is the amazing thing with actually action, right? You can believe whatever you want in terms of, you can be coming from the right or be coming from the left, but, as long as you think that, people, there's a basic human dignity that people need to be taken care of in an hour of need, you can show up and be of service.
All right. Well, please join us next time when we have Deb Weens and
Kelley Braggs
from Bridge of Hope.
Yep.
All right. Have a good one, Kelley.
You too. We are always appreciative of our listeners. Thank you so much for listening. We do have a favor to ask, though. If you're liking Atheist, and clearly you are, please share it with a few friends. We're looking to grow a lot in 2024. More topics, more interviews, more episodes in general. But we need your help to make that happen.
We are not asking you to contribute any money, just a few minutes of your time to share this episode, maybe on a social media post, or better yet, while you're visiting with a friend. Every new listener really helps us out. If you have any topic suggestions, questions, or thoughts on the show, feel free to write us at atheist@stlpodcast.com.
Atheist is produced by Justin Seiwell and Trend Media STL. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at STL Podcasts.
Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.